Hello, everybody. My name's Rob Rhodes, and I'm the Executive Vice President here at Iatric Systems. And today I am joined by Jackson Tate from CLASS, John Burke, who's the President of the International Health Facility Diversion Association, and Carolyn Bork, who is an RN here at Iatric Systems. Welcome, everybody. How's everybody doing today?
Good.
Great, thanks. Great.
Excellent. Well, as you all know, we're here today to talk about drug diversion, and we're here to talk about, what it means for hospitals, how we can work as an industry to battle misuse and mishandling of controlled substances. It's a big topic, so I'm going to jump right into it. And let's start off with what may feel obvious, but can each of you answer why drug diversion is so important? There's a lot going on in hospitals these days. That things like, people are still battling, the issues with COVID, risk management, just all of the things that go on in healthcare every single day. So why is this something that needs to hit a priority list? And let me start this question with John.
Thank you, sir. Well, it's I see it as a pretty obvious reason. It involves human beings. It involves the safety and the future of human beings. I mean, we have certainly, I always say there's three entities that are impacted by diversion inside healthcare facilities. The first one is the patient, which of course I think every health facility is trying to do the best for it to. And when diversion occurs, there's potential problems if they don't get medication. There's also potential problems because the person involved can be impaired in making life and death decisions that are that way. So you have the patients first. Secondly, is the person that's addicted. I mean, I think we don't. My background's in law enforcement. I think sometimes people think that we don't care about that, and that's totally not true. These are folks that are that have put a lot of time into becoming whatever they are, a registered nurse or whatever, and they're very dedicated. And we found that over the course of all the cases we did, that most of the times they hate what they're doing. It's an addiction issue, folks, and they cannot stop. And so we have those people to think about to salvage them. Sometimes they can even be salvaged to be back in nursing. Sometimes maybe not back in nursing to maybe administer medication, but some kind of salvage. And so those two entities are big. And the third entity is actually the institution itself, because they become impacted when diversion hits big time. That can be financially, that can be through their reputation, either way. But one of the things that I wanted to point out, and talked about it on a few articles I've written lately, is that the fact that, because of COVID, resources have been redirected. And I know this from many sources. So, when you have ICUs filled up and you have COVID issues, you need bodies from somewhere. And oftentimes they're taken from this area, which is people that are monitoring or looking at potential diversion. And so when that happens, and then you couple that with the fact that mere stress that COVID has caused everybody, especially those in healthcare facilities. I mean, those people that maybe are on the fence as far as maybe, thinking about addiction or had an addiction issue or a substance abuse issue, I think that the potential for that to happen is huge. So I'm hoping that as we are getting more recovered from this, that health facilities will begin put those personnel back where they belong. And because it's so, like I say, it's so important. It's a human being thing to start off with. And that's probably my best answer to why I think it's important.
Great. Thank you. Carolyn, how about you? Any thoughts on that?
I couldn't say it any better than John did. As far as the thoughts go, stats wise, Forbes Technology Council has estimated that 95% of drug diversion cases within the hospital remain uninvestigated. So it feels like we have a long way to go before we can feel like we're finding these and taking care of them at an early stage before the clinician gets to a point where they're not salvageable, as John said. So a lot of work to be done.
Great. Jackson, any opening comments from you on the topic?
No, I agree with everything that has been said by John and Carolyn. And I would just add, it's interesting being at class. Our perspective comes from speaking with the people who are on the front lines, the healthcare providers. That's what our research is based off of. And I can tell you my area of focus at class is around pharmacy solutions, speaking with pharmacy directors and pharmacy leadership about what they're trying to do. And it feels like every other conversation or just about, we're having a conversation about drug diversion technology and what their decision is happening, what decisions they're making there. And it really is pretty amazing to see the way that we've come around that. I think that in addition to what John and Carolyn have said, the perception around the opioid epidemic has said, hey, there is a role for the healthcare institutions to play in this. How do we help mitigate some of these challenges that have come up in our communities around opioid and controlled substance abuse? That awareness and the focus on the individual. I love what John said about it's not just about numbers, it's not just about medication, it's not just about losing costs. It's about making sure that the patient, the staff, whoever it is that's going to be impacted by it, that they are taken care of. So I think in addition to everything that has been said, I would just highlight that this is top of mind for so many hospital and health systems, and they really want to be making a difference there, and by focusing on this.
Great. So let me stay with you, Jackson. What in the research that you've done and the folks that you've talked to, what makes this such a challenge for hospitals?
That's a really good question. There are a couple of things that really make this a challenge. Is first and foremost, when someone is diverting or when someone is, misusing medications, they're usually going to be really good about hiding it. They're going to figure out a way, figure out backdoors, figure out loopholes that they can exploit that otherwise would not be detectable. So we luckily have the majority of health systems are relatively digitized when it comes to their medication transactions. So there are some digital footprints, but on top of that, you have to be able to pull all of that information, aggregate it together, and make it make sense. Which, from speaking with healthcare providers, we know that's a difficult thing to do, to pull from so many different systems, so many different data sets, and make sense of that. On top of that, you've got different organizational hierarchies and different organizational structures within different departments. So you've got your nurses, you've got your pharmacy, you've got anesthesia, you've got all these different individuals who may be interacting with with controlled substances that have a stakehold in drug diversion monitoring. And if they aren't all on the same page, you're going to have your organization trying to move in 10 million different directions at once. So bringing in some sort of a cohesive plan and some sort of an organizational governance structure around drug diversion, that takes a lot of work, as you can imagine, to get everyone on the same page and moving in the same direction there. Those are two of the biggest ones that we hear about from providers on our research end.
Great. How about you, John? Anything to add on that topic?
Well, he summed it up pretty well, but you know, a big part of the problem that I have seen, I've been looking at this for probably 30 years, in 1990 when we started, is the fact of not reporting. And I think some of the statistics that were pointed out there, about 95% of them are not reported. And obviously, and what he said is true, that sometimes these are difficult to detect. We started this, I'm so ancient that we started this without software. And now, as he mentioned, software is you almost have to have it. If you don't have it in your facility, you need to check, because it's absolutely essential. But I'll just give you some stats, and I know that from 1990 to 99, when I was with Cincinnati, we were looking at this. Our detectives were looking at it very closely. We arrested a nurse a week. I mean, you're talking about 50 a year, and you're not talking about us catching everybody, needless to say. And so if I got bugged by the press constantly. Well, how big is this deal? And so I didn't know. I was in my own little cocoon in Cincinnati, but I knew that Cincinnati wasn't the world's haven for institutional drug diverters. And so I started to look at populations. And when I looked at populations of Cincinnati and the United States, it showed out that we should be reporting about 102 a day. And when you look at statistics, that companies have come up with as to how much is being reported, they're somewhere, probably in the average of 300 to 400 a year. So you're starting to look at what probably happens in 3 or 4 days, is what's being reported. And I find this, it's gotten better. I have to tell you that it's gotten better. But I think that some of the difficulties, it even goes back to the fact that they don't want to report they don't want to be wrong. They don't want to, and this goes back, and I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit later about having diversion teams and some things that can help them with this, but they don't want to approach somebody and be wrong. They don't, if they don't get a confession, then they are afraid they're second guess themselves. So there's just a lot of issues. And I think maybe Jackson was alluding to, there's a lot of hierarchies, and there's a lot of people making decisions that may not be in the best interest of the institution, frankly. And we've seen that with people like David Kielikowski, who is probably the poster boy in my mind. I don't think we have enough time to go into all of that, but it's, that's the kind of situation. It should be easier. And I think and as we talk more, I think if they get serious about it, and if they begin to form a way to detect it along with the software, I think they'll feel much more comfortable about it. But we see people all the time in our conferences, and they're just getting started, and they don't know what to do. They're not comfortable with interviewing. They need to be more, get more training, or have more folks involved in that. And so I think that's, I understand that, but gosh, folks, this is in many cases, and I'm not being, dramatic. This is life and death. You have a person who's addicted, and they're moving on from place to place, and nothing's being done, and they likely are not able to stop themselves. You're looking at a potential overdose death. And that's, like I say, that's not being dramatic at all.
Thank you, John. Carolyn, you've been a nurse for a few years and worked a lot of your career in a hospital. What are your thoughts on this? Why is it such a challenge?
Jackson and John have both hit on them as far as I really can relate to nurses who may see something, or question activity unless they actually see somebody do something specific. If it's questionable, they don't like to report it up because maybe I just misunderstood, or we're rushed, we're busy. They probably are going to finish that later, and you never get back to it. So that's definitely something that I can relate to, and also with having a lot of different staff in different areas that you can't pull the information and gather that. I did want to mention for our audience, though, that to touch mostly on what John and Jackson said was the headlines and your reputation. I mean, just a few things that I could provide are to get an idea of the impact to your reputation. And headlines. How would you like to hear that on TV that a nurse was sentenced for tampering with fentanyl vials at your fertility clinic? Feds charge nurse with alleged diversion of morphine from hospice patients. The nurse is accused of stealing fentanyl from this hospital. This Georgia Health News, years of large-scale drug thefts reported at this hospital. So a lot of different ones like that, but other headlines point to the cost. So this facility has to pay $2.3 million to reserve a drug diversion allegations. And here's $4.1 million to settle opioid diversion claims. And here's 2 nurses died of overdoses inside this particular hospital. Here's $510,000 in drug diversion settlement, $1 million to settle a diversion. There's a big cost to your facility if you're not doing what you need to do to try to prevent it. I mean, you have to try.
Yeah, great. Next question. And I'm going to start with you, John. how can hospitals better manage the abuse of controlled substances? You know, where do they start in this process?
I just want to go back quickly to what Carolyn hit the nail on the head, by the way, when we talked about, she talks about the fear of reporting. You know, they don't want that headlines. And that was one thing we did in Cincinnati. I made sure, or made best sure, that that publicity didn't happen. And we were very successful in that, because that's very much a deterrent. However, when you see the 2.8 millions in some of these settlements, you'd think that would be a deterrent. But I have to tell you, I've talked to an attorney about this and he said, well, it's the cost of doing business. I hope that's not true. I hope that's not the thought pattern, because again, we're back to human beings. And so I'll get back on your question. I'm sorry, I went a little bit
Yeah,
off.
no, not a problem.
I think that well, first of all, and this has to come all the way to the top. The top has to be serious about this. And I've seen many places over the years that this has begun to happen. And it makes me feel really good when I see health facilities. And I can imagine that everybody that's on this broadcast is probably very serious about diversion. It's probably the people that aren't on here that we need to touch even more. But I appreciate the ones that are. And the first thing is, and I've seen this over time, is some kind of what I would call a diversion specialist. And a diversion specialist is typically nursing or pharmacy. Although I've seen some very good pharmacy techs do this. I know several across the country that are doing this, but it's typically pharmacy or nursing. And what is their responsibility? They're responsible for monitoring the day-to-day controlled substance medications that are dispensed, that are administered in the hospital. So they get reports every single day. They're using some kind of software, otherwise they're going to probably pull their hair out. They're using some kind of software, and they are the person that is, I consider, the point person. And then you have which I saw started in a children's hospital in Cincinnati way back in the early 90s, is a diversion team. And they can be called different things, but this is, again, pharmacy and nursing for sure. Oftentimes it's headed up by the head pharmacist, but this can also include HR. It can include security, depending on what role security plays in your health facility. They play many different roles. Some of them won't be doing a lot in this area, and some do a lot. And then what basically each hospital or each facility can decide who they want on their diversion team, who's important, and legal's probably on there. So what's the importance of the diversion team? So if you get an unresolved discrepancy, and obviously we'd like those places at the floor or whatever to resolve those, and they usually do, but an unresolved discrepancy after maybe 24 hours or 48 hours, and it might very well go where either diversion specialists or anybody on the team could call a meeting. And usually those people then are close where they can meet, say, within an hour or two. And then they discuss the case, and it may be a discrepancy, or it may be an outright diversion, which is, is probably handled a little differently. And so the team makes a decision on how we're going to go forward. And so what you've done is you've taken it very seriously. People in the institution know you have a diversion team, and they take it very seriously. I think that's a certain prevention. And, if I'm a diverter, I may avoid that hospital if I know that, hey, they're really on this and they're going to do something about it. And so those folks then will decide, and maybe you might bring law enforcement in. It depends on what, those decisions get made in there. And then if it is not just a discrepancy that can be resolved, if it is a diversion, what I always ask is they make sure they meet back again. And we, in law enforcement, we call it a debrief. And a debrief in this situation is great, because you want to find out, hey, what did we do right? What did we do wrong? And you probably did something wrong, or you did something that you can improve on. And we may want to make a decision. Do we have the right people on the diversion team? Do we need to add another entity? Maybe somebody doesn't need to be on. We don't need any more people on this than we have to. And so that's to me how you handle it. And it's a very serious attempt, and it has to come all the way from the top. You're not going to hire a diversion specialist and have a diversion team if the top dog and isn't convinced that this is an important thing. And it is so important if you're going to have any meaningful. And that's the group that I think might be depleted somewhat right now. And I'd like to see them bring that group back together and have that diversion specialist.
Great. Jackson, thoughts?
Yeah, no, I want to just add to. I think that John, for better or worse, you took all my talking points. But no, I think the thing that we see most is that it's really more so about being intentional. Having a dedicated drug diversion. So we at class we focus on the software and the technology, right? That helps, but really the thing that makes the most difference is having an organization who is going to be intentional about their approach to drug diversion monitoring. So again, that top-down approach, having leadership that's bought in to say, this is a serious problem. We want to attack it as seriously as we possibly can, and pulling in all those important stakeholders. Once you have that, even if you don't have automated processes for the software solutions or some of those other pieces that come into play, you have somewhat of a structure that you can report up incidences to, you can report up discrepancies to, and something will get done. If you just say, hey, the software is going to solve all of my problems, it will help highlight those things, but you may not have the organizational structure to make that actionable. And I think that's really what John is trying to highlight is, it's going to be a manual process, for better or for worse, for a decent amount of the time. So you need to have some sort of an intentional process of how you're going to monitor, report, and stay accountable too. I think that's the theme that I heard in John and how he was talking about as well, is you need some sort of a structure to where the different departments and the different leads are going to be accountable to one another to, hey, we looked into what was going on here, and here is the action that we took. And here's the good news: is those discrepancies, even if they're not highlighting a diverter, but they're highlighting someone who's maybe non-compliant with the processes, you're going to become more efficient with your use of medications. You're going to become more compliant with your drug usage protocols over time, and overall that should help the health system. So all of these things, even if you're not necessarily catching diverters with every single instance of a discrepancy, you're going to be improving your health system and improving your care of patients. That which is the end goal, right?
Right.
I think
Excellent.
Jackson, you had some great talking points.
Thanks, John. I'm really good at spitballing on the fly.
Well, Jackson,
Hey,
you had
go
a
ahead.
you had a great point with especially with software that's pointing out possible drug diversion. It may, when you look into it, it may very well not be a drug diversion, but you're finding compliance is not being met at your hospital, and you know better where you can focus. And I think that we've made a lot of good points here, but a lot of hospitals say, oh, but pandemic, our staff is low. We can't really, get into drug diversion now. That's absolutely not the point to take, because now is the time that anyone, as John said, is on the verge or has had a substance use disorder that they've been able to control and maybe just deal with it outside. They're now working extra hours. They have patients that are dying left and right on them. They've got young people sick. They may be isolated from their family because they are working with COVID patients and they don't want to bring it home to them. So there's a lot of surveillance hospitals that did surveillance rounds. They don't do them. That staff is home. So they're, maybe they're doing some, a little more computer work on it, but there's a lot more opportunity for the staff to divert during this pandemic. A lot of changes have happened to make them want to, give them the opportunity to, and we're more lax in the facilities and being able to see that. So very important during the pandemic.
Yeah, kind of a perfect storm of all of these things, making it an even bigger issue than it might otherwise be.
Right.
Just listening to you guys talk about this is obviously a really huge problem, and reminds me a lot about what we were talking about in the late 90s, early 2000s with cybersecurity. I worked in hospitals for 15 years, and so I spent a lot of time during that time period, trying to get people in the organization to understand just how big of an issue cybersecurity was. And it takes time, and it's very similar to what you've all been talking about, where, it starts out with, almost like, hey, this isn't really that big an issue. And when you look at the problem as a whole, it is a big issue. And over time, it gets worse if you don't focus on it, and focus your investments and your organizational structure, et cetera, et cetera. But one of the things I think, and Jackson, I think you mentioned this for sure. I believe John did too. There's a lot to do. So technology can clearly help us with some of these things. It certainly did when we were talking about cybersecurity. Jackson, you want to talk a little bit about what you guys are seeing in class in terms of the technology and where that's headed?
Yeah, no, it has been really interesting. So a little bit of the background to class and really what we saw here. The we started really watching and becoming more aware of the drug diversion monitoring space towards the end of 2018 timeframe is really when we started to get a lot of pressure from customers saying, hey, we're making a lot of decisions. So we were aware of the technology of some of the different vendors that have been out there for a number of years, some of the legacy folks who have really laid the groundwork. But really there was this resurgence of, hey, there's new technology that's here, hopefully trying to automate the space more so than legacy technology could. And really the good news is based off of the research that we've done as we've looked at some of those newer technologies, is that customer satisfaction across the board is really pretty high. What does that tell us here at class? It means that these processes that were highly manual or highly labor intensive, it is helping those things to be more streamlined. It's helping those workflows to be, what's the right word for it? To be more approachable, I would say, for a hospital or for a health system. So really, we hear that for the most part across the board of the solutions that we're looking at now, that are, we would call maybe the second generation, the next generation of drug diversion monitoring software and technology. So and that's largely why we get so many questions from providers around it. Is, hey, it's a hot topic, and there's a lot of new entrants to this market who are really disrupting our potential decisions that we're going to go out and make. So that has been really cool for us to watch and see things are really changing and moving in a really good direction as customers would tell us about it.
Great. Carolyn, any thoughts from your experience on that?
I couldn't add much from that. I know that, what I've seen from different demos and that, I think that what can be expanded in that area is being able to take as much of the different data sources as you can and putting them all in one view because obviously we're going to be finding, or the software finds more events than what they ever found just looking at some reports, and it's more real time. So the more that you can pull into one little package, the better it's going to help them to understand what's going on, and maybe even rule out some of those possible diversions. I think that there needs to be a lot more looking at from beginning to end. So, the pharmacy techs, they have as much opportunity to divert as a nurse on the floor. A lot of people focus just on the nursing. It's not those nurses. And you have a special challenge with surgical nurses, your CRNAs and your anesthesiologists.
Mhm.
They're behind the drapes. So whatever drugs that they have that they're administering, or hopefully administering to their patients, then they have no one that sees what they're doing. And typically those automated cabinets are a little bit set up differently because you have to pull a lot of drugs ahead of time before your case. So I think that's something too that can be expanded on with current software.
Yeah, and I would just adding on top of Carolyn, I think that using the technology to get as complete of a picture as you possibly can, that's what you want the technology for. There's a lot of discussion around in the industry right now around what is the role of AI in drug diversion monitoring. Is that the frontier? And I don't want to say that class is the expert to say yes or no AI is, but here's really what we've learned from customers is that if you give customers a complete picture of as complete of a picture as you can get of that individual, that person who you're investigating, their digital footprint, and allow them to look at the nuances and say, hey, this is likely diversion or this is likely non-compliance, and we can approach that conversation. That's really what customers are looking for at the end of the day. Now, if you can have an AI that can say, hey, we've learned from all these past cases, these are definitely diverters or not, there's a little bit of an argument on whether or not we're to that point. But really, I agree with Carolyn that it's really, we want to see end to end what's going on with our medications in the health system. Can we look at and say, from the beginning points of, hey, this is what we ordered from the wholesaler, and this is what ended up being stocked in our carousel. Once it goes out to the floors, hey, was that nurse who dispensed that medication, were they clocked in? Were they supposed to be on shift? Then you start looking at some of the things that are maybe a little bit more advanced down the road. Okay, well, now we've got stuff going on at our retail pharmacies where we may not have the same type of inventory controls. Or, hey, we're dispensing medications in our PCA pumps. We're dispensing morphine and other controlled substances that way. How do those records match up with what the nurses are telling us they're dispensing to and infusing to patients that way? So it is really about getting as much as you can, a full digital footprint, and then having a system that makes it relatively easy to see that individuals, to see that, understand it, and then carry out some sort of an investigation that involves multiple parties. And really, that's where the technology has come in and made things significantly better. We looked at our most recent drug diversion monitoring report that we did published it in the beginning of 2021. And when you look at what customers from all of these different ones pointed to as far as outcomes that they were achieving from this new technology, almost all said we're getting better compliance with our drug usage protocols, and we have much better inter-team coordination and communication when they're adopting these technologies. So that's what people are pointing to as, yeah, we're pretty well guaranteed to get these types of outcomes if we implement this type of technology, and obviously do it right. Take the time to set it up and take the time to set up the governance. But it's been really encouraging for us to see, hey, this is a big problem and something's actually having a tangible impact on it.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it sounds like it's even beyond just finding the diverters if there's better compliance because of these systems. So that's really interesting. John, anything to add?
Well, they did a great job of it. I think what it points out is what we talked about before. We talked about the diversion specialist, the diversion team. You have to have the software, but you have to have somebody looking at it. I've been to hospitals where they've said, oh yeah, we're spending X amount of dollars on software. I said, well, who's monitoring it? Nobody. Well, we got it.
Yeah.
And so it looks good. And you have to have somebody really on a daily basis that's skilled and looking at it. And that's the best team. I kind of look at it at law enforcement. I was in homicide for years, and we had a dual role with the people that did crime scenes. And that's kind of what this is. All this good information is here, but if you're not using it, it's kind of worthless. So I hate to see places. I hope this isn't the case anymore. But like I said, when it's like, well, we've got the software, and it almost like, well, we're doing great, but we're not catching anybody because we're not looking at it.
Yeah, it goes back to that intentionality that we talked about earlier. You've got to have some sort of a way to make actionable what you're seeing in the data.
Exactly.
Yep. Yeah, very interesting. Well, unfortunately, I think we're out of time for today, but I want to thank all of you on the panel, John, Jackson, Carolyn. Great discussion. Obviously, if you went third, you had less to say on the topic, but you had a couple great people ahead of you. So that's the fun thing about these types of panels. So we hope everybody enjoyed this conversation. We hope you enjoy the rest of the Fall Exchange. And any of you out there that are competing in the challenges, the challenge code for this session is diversion. So again, thank you to all the folks on the panel today, and thank you to all of you, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.